This episode is brought to you in part by audiobook narrator Mike Scott. When selecting your next audiobook, choose from some of the great titles narrated by audiobook narrator Mike Scott, like Bloody Autumn, the Shenandoah Valley Campaign of 1864. And if you're an author or publisher interested in having your written works produced as audiobooks, give Mike a shout at MikeScottVoice.com. Mike Scott, the voice of history. And Civil War Trails. It's the world's largest open-air museum, and they offer over 1,300 sites across 6 states. Drive the Gettysburg campaign turn by turn, paddle to Frederick Douglass's birthplace, or hike to remote earthworks and artillery positions. Visit civilwartrails.org to request a brochure and explore their interactive map. Follow Civil War Trails and create some history of your own. The 1863 civilians of Gettysburg were reluctant witnesses to the Great Battle. Join Ken Rich, the man in the red shirt, for his historic town walking tours. You could book these tours by emailing ken@gettysburgtownhistory.com. That's ken@gettysburgtownhistory.com. And when you're in town, look for the guy in the red shirt.
Want the freshest cup of coffee in Gettysburg? Then visit 82 Cafe at 82 Steinware Avenue. They roast all of their coffee in-house and have a full coffee bar to keep you caffeinated during your visit. Check them out at www.raggededgerc.com for their menu and shipping options and their freshly roasted coffee. Use promo code Hancock for 10% off your order. That's 82 Cafe at 82 Steinware Avenue across from the Dobbin House or raggededgerc.com.
You're listening to Addressing Gettysburg.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this episode of Addressing Gettysburg's Ask a Gettysburg Guide. And today we are talking about the 151st Pennsylvania, the Schoolteacher Regiment. The so-called Schoolteacher Regiment. We'll find out why in just a bit. Joining us today is Jim Pangburn, a favorite here on Addressing Gettysburg. Yes, of course, Mike, you can clap. That's good. That's good.
Thank you.
And Jim, how you been?
Not bad.
Good. Good. How's your summer been? Hot?
It's moving along.
Yeah.
The heat's been rough. Trying to get used to the closure of Little Round Top. That's kind of weird.
What do you do? Because every guide has a different way of working around that. How do you work around that?
Well, I've been going down to Crawford Avenue since that's open and going around Devil's Den and going through the wheat field.
Yeah.
And, of course, now, if it's a 2-hour tour, we can, get Culp's Hill involved or Peace Light. I used to not go to the Peace Light too much because when you go to that northern end of the battlefield, you got to go to the southern end of the Round Top, and you get way behind.
Yeah.
Well, now it's not an issue.
Right.
Now you can go up to the Peace Light. So,
Little Round Top, is it true that when it was open that would eat up a lot of the time because people want to get out and look at the view and take pictures and all that stuff, right?
At least 20 minutes out of your tour.
Yeah, that's a long time.
And if you're running late and you got to go to Little Round Top, then you're really in the hole. You need like 20 minutes probably with a bus to get back to end your tour.
Right.
A car tour, you might be able to do a little bit faster. You don't have to load so many people.
So this should be easy for the next 18 months to 2 years for guides getting back on time at least, because there's no Little Round Top.
I would think so.
You would hope so.
Yeah, you'd hope so.
Yeah. Well, today we're talking about a unit that it wasn't on Little Round Top. Nothing to do with Little Round Top. They're out on the first day's battlefield. They're the 151st, as I said before. Jim, give us a little background on the 151st Pennsylvania.
Well, Matt, as you said, they're known as the Schoolteachers Regiment. There's a guy named Harrison Allen that was in command leading up to Gettysburg, but George McFarland commanded here at Gettysburg. I think Allen took ill. But McFarland was a school teacher in central Pennsylvania, and he ran like 3 schools for boys in some small towns in Juniata and Snyder counties, Freeburg, McAllisterville, and Richfield. He must have been pretty impressive to his students because many of them followed him into the education career field and became teachers.
Oh.
And when he started to raise men to fill the ranks of the 151st Pennsylvania, he looked to many of his former students now, teachers. And Mike Lentz and I were just talking about before the podcast about the number of school teachers that made up the regiment. The fact of the matter is most of the guys in the regiment, like most regiments, were farmers.
Right.
But I've read anywhere from 60 to 122 guys. Mike saw 113 were school teachers. And there were 467 men in the unit, which is pretty high.
Right,
pretty
it's
large
a big
regiment.
unit, yeah.
One of the biggest ones you'll find.
Sure.
So in any case, there's a large percentage, well over 10% and probably close to 20% or so are school teachers making up the regiment.
Yeah, I think the 113 comes from Pennsylvania at Gettysburg, right, Mike? And he gives that number in his speech. But where the other numbers come from, if we don't trust his 113, what's with the discrepancy?
I don't know where I got to 122. I heard that someplace, and I've been using that. But the 60 I got out of the Regimental History in the 151st Pennsylvania, which is written by a friend of mine by the name of Mike Drees. Mike got a hold of Colonel McFarland's diary out of the Juniata County Historical Society. Well, no, he got a hold of the diary, and then he published a book called An Imperishable Fame.
Okay.
That's what George McFarland, the colonel of the unit, said about the unit after Gettysburg. And so Mike wrote a regimental history. He wrote a book about George McFarland, and getting the information on McFarland, he got a lot of information on the unit, and he realized no one had written a regimental history on the 151st Pennsylvania, so Mike wrote the 151st Pennsylvania Volunteers at Gettysburg, Like Ripe Apples in a Storm is the subtitle. Mike told me he wanted that to be the title.
Yeah.
Like Ripe Apples in a Storm. That was a description of one of the guys describing what it was like to watch his colleagues fall around him at the Herbst Woods on July 1st west of the Seminary. But his publisher, McFarland Publishing of all things, in Jefferson, North Carolina, isn't that ironic?
Yeah.
And the publishers from North Carolina, and that's who they were fighting, North Carolina. But they said, Mike, if you want to sell a book about Gettysburg, you got to get the title, you got to get the unit in there. That's what will get people's attention. So he had to title the book 151st Pennsylvania Volunteers at Gettysburg, but the subtitle is Like Ripe Apples.
They should have flipped it.
I agree.
Make the subtitle the title and the title the subtitle.
But the publishers wanted the
well,
unit.
hey, man, if they're putting up the dough, you do what they say.
That's right.
So they are in Biddle's Brigade, correct, or Rowley's Brigade?
Doubleday's 3rd Division.
Mm-hmm.
When Doubleday takes command after Reynolds gets killed, the 1st Corps, Rowley moves up from brigade to division command, 3rd Division of the 1st Corps, and then Chapman Biddle takes command of the brigade,
right,
which consisted of the 80th New York, which was also known as the 20th State Militia, 121st Pennsylvania, and the 142nd Pennsylvania, and the 151st.
And the 151st. 151st, when they arrive on the field, is put in reserve.
Right.
Initially.
Right.
And so when Biddle's Brigade gets into the action, they're not part of it. Correct? Initially.
They were kind of at first, and then there was a lot of maneuvering going on.
Yeah.
One of the interesting things about the 151st is the way they arrived on the battlefield. You know, most of the 1st Corps came with Reynolds up the Emmitsburg Road.
Right.
But if you know where Mertz Tavern is, south of Gettysburg, near where the Route 15 bypass
the Morris
meets the Emmitsburg Road.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Where Reynolds spent his last night.
Mm-hmm.
Right there's a road that veers off toward Fairfield. It's called the Bullfrog Road. You're probably familiar with it.
Oh, yeah.
And they were sent up that road basically because they were worried about Confederates threatening the Union left flank as Reynolds' men moved up the Emmitsburg Road. So they moved out toward Fairfield to kind of protect the left. Mm-hmm. And they went up the Bullfrog Road quite a ways, and some of them kind of veered off toward Francis Cunningham Farm. But a lot of them ended up on what we now know as Millerstown or Pumping Station Road, the extension of the Wheatfield Road. And they ended up crossing the Sachs Bridge and then reconnecting with the Millerstown Road, and then they went up Black Horse Tavern Road.
Okay.
And then they went out on the Willoughby Run Road, kind of like Longstreet's countermarch.
Right.
Then they came out on the Fairfield Road. So they kind of entered the battlefield off Fairfield Road, the Hagerstown Road, kind of where that shopping center used to be that's kind of now defunct, out there where the...
where the pizza place is?
No, not that far. This is just right where Reynolds Avenue leaves Fairfield
Where Tom
Road.
and Jerry's used to be, the gas
Tom
station.
and Jerry's, that's it.
Yeah.
And they're kind of coming north, facing fire coming from the Herbst Woods area. And then the unit kind of turns to face Heath's division coming from the west, and 151st is put in reserve right in front of the Schmucker Hall at the Seminary.
Okay. So... while the fighting's going on, I guess we should get what happens to Biddle's Brigade. We did an episode last year on Biddle's Brigade, so you don't need to get too deep into it, but just to lead into the 151st getting involved. Biddle's Brigade's getting into a pretty nice little scrap, and what's going on with them?
Well, you know about Meredith's Iron Brigade going into the Herbst Woods. Basically what Biddle does is he moves to their left along what we call today East McPherson Ridge and supports the flank there. Because the North Carolinians who are coming from the west are extending from the Chambersburg Pike really all the way to the Fairfield Road and eventually beyond that. And so Meredith's guys would have gotten pretty severely flanked on their left, and Biddle comes in and kind of protects that. Kind of takes on the 47th North Carolina and another North Carolina unit that are extending almost to the Fairfield Road.
Now, when it's all said and done on July 1st, is he going to be, Biddle's brigade, is that going to be the southernmost or leftmost regiment in the Union line?
Yeah, until Buford's cavalry. When the infantry arrives, they do what cavalry normally does. They go over and protect the flank. So Buford's guys are kind of along where West Confederate Avenue is, kind of near the where the Schultz house is today and the old armory, and along that stone wall on the right side of the road. They're protecting the far left. But Biddle's brigade, in terms of infantry, really was the left.
Yeah, I said regiment, but I meant brigade. Yes. Okay, So the Iron Brigade, as you mentioned, is in McPherson's Woods. Biddle comes in and extends the line a little further south there, and for a while they're getting into it with the Confederates. But there's more Confederates, and they're overlapping. They're flanking Biddle's brigade. No one is coming to Biddle's left flank's rescue, correct?
Not that I'm aware.
No, I mean, except for Buford out on the flank there
and
later
he's kinda, further back a little bit. So it's not like he's right on Biddle's left or anything like that.
Yeah. All right. So the 151st, though, when they get sent in, who pulls them out of reserve? I think it was Doubleday ordered someone. I want to say.
Originally, they were in the line of Biddle's brigade. And Robinson's division, the 2nd Division of 1st Corps, comes in, and Paul's brigade of Robinson's division begins to form a barricade in front of the seminary building, kind of the rear, like an observed position. But then Robinson was sent to the north along Sheeds Woods up toward Oak Hill. And then the 151st eventually was sent back, and they occupied the barricade that Paul's brigade was occupying, and kind of took their place in reserve once Robinson moved to the north. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay. And then they get pulled out of reserve, though, eventually, because things are getting a little rough.
Yeah, but it was later in the fight.
Yeah.
It wasn't until about 3 o'clock. The other regiments in Biddle's brigade were up on East McPherson Ridge, up there where you see all the monuments today, the Cross Monument, 142nd, and all those monuments. That's pretty much Biddle's brigade. And they were supported by Cooper's battery. And the 151st is kind of to the right and to the rear, and it's when the Iron Brigade is starting to get pushed back and flanked that the 151st is sent forward. So around 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So pretty late. So the Iron Brigade's having a hard time. They've been fighting since the morning. This is now the lull has passed, and now we're into the afternoon fight. And they're starting to have trouble, and the 151st is ordered to go in because there's a gap between Biddle's brigade and the Iron Brigade, correct? That's exactly right.
Right. So they're going in to fill that gap.
Yeah. And it's pretty much the southeastern edge of the Herbst Woods.
Yeah.
And I was just reading that about half the unit supposedly actually extended into the open area. Today you can see their flank marker along Stone Avenue, Meredith Avenue. But according to what Mike Dries said, half the unit was in the open, half was in the Herbst Woods.
Okay. So that's interesting. And so, but the two brigades on either side of them, their own brigade and the Iron Brigade, see them coming up, and they interpret that as not an addition to the line, but relief, correct? I'm
not really sure, to be honest with you.
Oh, okay.
On that. I'm really not sure. I just know the Iron Brigade is pulling back. The 19th Indiana's on the left flank. They're kind of being flanked. And the 151st comes in and kind of starts to fire into the North Carolinians to relieve the Iron Brigade and help them withdraw.
Okay. In Pennsylvania at Gettysburg, McFarland says that, now this could be him throwing shade, but he says that the Iron Brigade at least thought that they were the relief, and they started to withdraw. And I think I read that somewhere. It might have been here in the brigades at Gettysburg too. But okay, so either way,
I'll take his word for it.
Okay, so now they're kind of out there all on their own.
Yeah, they were actually at the end of the fight. when all the Union's forces retreat back to Seminary Ridge, where the seminary is, the last units were the 151st Regiment and Stone's Brigade. Mm-hmm. Everybody else has pulled back to the seminary at that point.
Right, and so
Stone's, kind of on their own.
Stone's Brigade's over on the Chambersburg Pike,
right, to the right or to the north of the 151st.
Right. Okay.
So
but then there's a big gap though till you get to the 151st.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
And Mike and I were talking about this, and he kind of reminded me. Mike Lentz is here with this. It reminds me what the 151st did of that commercial. You might remember where there's like this desert and there's all this smoke, and you hear a helicopter come in, and the narrator says, "When everybody else is falling back, we're going in, running away from the trouble. We're going into it."
Yeah,
that's pretty much what the 151st was doing.
Yeah,
and when they moved forward, it's like 3:00 in the afternoon. So pretty much everything fell apart on Seminary Ridge around 4.
Right.
So this is.
So it's like a last-ditch effort.
Last-ditch effort, yeah.
So these guys, is this their first major battle that they're seeing?
It is. And that's one of the things I wanted to talk about. They were a 9-month unit, not a 3-year like a lot of these units.
Right.
And there was a lot of controversy about that. A lot of the guys thought they had enlisted in September so that their enlistment would run out at the end of June. And the government said, well, no, your official enlistment is November, so you're not really due to leave until the 27th of August. And somehow, I guess there was a compromise where the term of enlistment would end in July. But the point is, they were really within weeks of leaving. And nobody really could have said a whole lot. But, they're Pennsylvanians, and the battle's going to be on Pennsylvania soil. So a lot of them were like, well, we're not going in there.
Yeah.
And it's going to cost them.
Yeah, big time.
Tim Smith wrote the foreword to Mike's regimental history, and he talks about it, about why more people don't know about the 151st. And he made a good point. He said, the only thing out there in Herbst Woods when you're on Reynolds Avenue is the death site marker of Reynolds in the 151st Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
And everybody's paying attention to the death site marker for Reynolds.
Right.
So...
yeah, you're right. He's right, because and that monument's a pretty tall monument. It's not like it's hard to miss, but no one cares. Everybody's focused on where Reynolds died.
Right.
Yeah, that's weird.
But here's the thing. This is the casualty totals. It's amazing. If you know Gettysburg, you know that the top number of casualties of any unit at Gettysburg, biggest battle is half the world, is 24th Michigan, 363. They fight in the Herbst Woods just in front of the 151st. Does anybody know who number two is in total casualties?
I'm going to guess it's the 151st.
Guess that. 337 out of 467 men. They're number 2.
Yeah.
The top 2 Union regiments in the battle are in the Herbst Woods on day 1.
Right.
And who are they fighting? 26th North Carolina, which has the highest number of casualties in any regiment in war.
Yeah. Hard fighting there.
Yeah.
Hard fighting.
Yeah.
And McFarland, I'm reading his speech here in Pennsylvania, Gettysburg, and he seems like a pretty good writer, but he just doesn't have that panache that Chamberlain had. And that's probably why everybody thinks Chamberlain did all the hard fighting here.
Yeah, Chamberlain's a college professor, and
McFarland
is a
regular old school teacher. Yeah. So, all right. So they're new, but McFarland did target practice with them.
That's right.
Which I understand wasn't very common back then, and he actually got in trouble with General Reynolds for it. I think it was back in Fredericksburg. Do you remember where it was? Somewhere like
was
that.
it on the march? I was thinking that at some point he stopped them, and just to relieve the tension, he had them practice firing, which was kind of unusual.
Yeah. Oh, here it says, let's see, it was blah, blah, blah. Here drill and picket duty continued with such marked beneficial results that General Reynolds frequently complimented for good marksmanship and soldierly qualities. Oh, that's not the part I was looking for. But yeah, so they're pretty good shots. They have seen other battles. They just weren't under heavy fire. It was Fredericksburg and Chancellorsville, I believe. They were at both of those, right?
They were basically formed in the late part of 62. Lincoln had made a request just about the time of the Second Manassas campaign for additional troops. I think it might be like 600,000 or something. And the 151st was one of those units that answered that call. They were basically on outpost duty for quite a while just outside Washington. They were at Chancellorsville, and they got close to fire. Like a few of their guys were, kind of close to some Confederate pickets, and there was fire, but it was nothing that amounted to any casualties or anything. So really, this really is their first battle. They're kind of like the 24th Michigan. They were down there at Chancellorsville, but they really weren't engaged.
Right. So when they're moving out and they're engaged in the battle here, they're taking some pretty good casualties, but McFarland orders them not to fire in volleys, but to pick your target. Right? Go ahead.
It was just funny. I was just reading that before I came over. It's interesting you saw that. Yeah, and apparently because of that target practice, it worked better for them.
Yeah.
Just to deliver a blind volley and hope you hit something, whereas these guys are individually picking out enemy soldiers and were able to hit them. So they're a lot more effective.
In a speech he says, but our men coolly waited until they saw an exposed enemy and then brought him to the ground. Expressions like, there he goes, and I brought my man, etc. were heard, and men loaded more cheerfully because another gun less was left to send its leaden hail into our exposed ranks.
Yeah. And the thing about this is these guys are firing at close range.
Yeah.
I think at one point they were something like 50 to 100 yards from the enemy. 20 paces is used. So the Confederates are coming out of the Herbst Woods, and the 151st is right there where the woods kind of thin out on the eastern McPherson Ridge, just kind of waiting for them. And it's in the American Civil War, you don't see guys getting as close to each other like they did in the American Revolution, because in the American Revolution they're firing smoothbore muskets. So you're only killing somebody at 50 to 100 yards, where in the American Civil War with rifled weapons, you're killing people at 300 to 500 yards. So you don't tend to get that close. And it's kind of rare that they get this close. Like the wheat field, they got close because they're, in a compressed area that's open. And same thing here at the Herbst Woods. The 151st is just standing there waiting for these guys to come out of the woods, and they're like 20 paces away. So, today you can go to the 151st Monument, and they've got flank markers. And you can take 8th graders, and you can line them up along that line. And I'll often do that. 20 big paces, and you're just inside just outside the wood line, and say, look at this. This is how close they are.
Yeah.
And so at that distance, you should be able to hit.
You should be, yeah, especially if you're taking careful aim.
Right.
Yeah. How long are they out there fighting for?
Well, everybody fell back and started to fall back from Seminary Ridge around 4 o'clock. They had to have been out there at least a half an hour or so, because I know one of the things it said was that they were alone out there on their own, being fired at in the flanks for 15 to 20 minutes.
Yeah.
But everybody else has retreated. Now they're out there, and they've been hitting the flanks for like 15, 20 minutes.
So that's what's amazing to me, is these guys are out there, and they're not facing one regiment. They're facing several regiments.
Yeah. Pettigrew's brigade, basically.
Yeah.
Half of it, anyhow.
Right.
11th,
what's
North
left
Carolina,
of
26th. Right.
And I mean, I would think that they would be swallowed up rather easily, but of course I've never been in this type of situation, so what do I know? But so what is it that you think that makes them hold out for a half hour or 20 minutes?
It's the condition of the North Carolinians too. They've been fighting the Iron Brigade, so they've taken a lot of casualties. They're pretty exhausted. They're coming uphill through the woods. So I think that has something to do with it.
I'm sure it has a lot to do with it.
But the 151st is stubborn. They're fighting on home soil.
Yeah.
And they're inspired by that. And this is the first time they've done that. So I think that had a lot to do with it too.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So, okay, so then they fall back. They fall back, or they retreat, they withdraw? What is it, an order, or is it spontaneous?
I think Doubleday may have given the command at some point, and then McFarland gives a command for the unit to eventually fall back. And where they fell back to was just northwest of the Schmucker Hall.
Okay.
And their entire they fall back to the rest of Biddle's brigade.
All right, yeah. Actually, wait, here, I think I might have found the answer here. Receiving no orders to retire, I held my regiment in position until nearly every third man had fallen. Then, seeing no Union troops coming to our relief, but that our right and center had fallen back, as well as the brigade on the left, I gave the order to retire firing. Okay, so he did.
He pretty much did it on his own.
Yeah. Which is probably smart. 30 of your troops are gone, and you'd probably be like, maybe now's a good time.
Yeah.
You save some of them there. Okay, so they go back to Seminary Ridge. Now, he says at one point that when they withdraw, there's the Confederates don't pursue him. They stop because there's a fresh brigade coming up, and they allow them to pass.
Right.
What brigade is that?
So in the Herbst Woods, when they move forward to cover everybody's retreat, they're fighting North Carolinians. When they fall back to the seminary, that's right, another group comes up. It's Perrin's Brigade, South Carolina. And the main regiment that they're going to be fighting is the 14th South Carolina.
So Perrin's Brigade, you have to say it like that. Perrin.
Oh, yes.
Abno Pewin is how you say his name. Perrin's Brigade, do they engage them while they're still withdrawing? Or
I think they engaged them while the 151st had fallen back and was kind of standing along the seminary building.
Okay, so they're already back at the new line, basically.
Yeah, and at one point, what happened was the 151st noticed they were starting to get flanked on the left side of Schmucker Hall, so they kind of fall back to the north side to take shelter. And McFarland, at one point, is just northwest of the building. And he's looking down under, trying to look under the smoke to the left to see where his unit is being flanked. And about that time, he takes a bullet through both ankles.
That sounds
And
fun.
he will end up being the last patient to leave the seminary building. 2 months later, in early September, he was the last patient.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's kind of an interesting story about him. Can I?
Go ahead.
Can I divert a little?
Please do.
He was in a bed supposedly on the southeastern corner of the building. He was wounded on the northwestern corner, but he was recuperating in the southeastern corner of the building. And all the doctors were apparently attending to all the other 600 so patients in the building. And there was a pitcher of water on a chest of drawers across the room, and he's sitting upright with his back to the backboard. And there's nobody to help him, so he gets up and tries to hobble across the room to get water. A cannonball came into the room and lodged itself in the backboard that he was just leaning against. So by getting up to get the water, he saved himself.
Yeah, man. And it's like if he had said, "Oh, I'll get it later," it would have been over.
Yeah, it would have been over.
Right.
Wouldn't have needed the water anymore.
You never know. That's why every time you get an idea, do it right away.
Yeah.
You might get a cannonball in your head if you don't.
Stay hydrated.
Yeah, and stay hydrated. Right? Always stay hydrated. It might save your life in more ways than one. All right, I got a question, though. So while the 151st is kind of out there, just swinging in the wind, nobody back on Seminary Ridge sees them and says, hey, maybe we should reform and go out there and protect their flanks and maybe try to push back the Rebs. No,
the Confederate numbers were just so great that the rest of Biddle's brigade has no choice but to fall back, and they're not in position. Really all they're doing is just trying to delay the Confederates as long as possible.
Yeah.
So they can make a retreat through town. So when they get back to Seminary Ridge, they're barely hanging on.
Yeah, and I think this has come up on shows about something to do with the first day before. It's important to keep in mind that the intention probably was not to win a decisive battle out on the first day's battlefield. It was to delay so that they can get to Cemetery Hill with a substantial force. And also, I'm sure, weaken the Confederates as well.
And give the rest of the Union Army the time they need to come up and occupy the Fishhook position. And, if you look at the battle in the latter stages, the Union Army may have waited too long to leave the seminary grounds because as some of the artillery is going down the Chambersburg Road, there are Confederates up there among the seminary buildings shooting at the horses and, taking out, slowing down some of the guns, capturing some of the guns that were, and it got a little hairy in town. I mean, the 11th Corps was retreating from north of town. So these Union First Corps guys are coming in from the west, and all of a sudden all these other guys are coming in on their left from the north, and they're running at each other. And I've read that at some points, Union soldiers covered the entire street from the stoop of one house to another. I mean, they were completely blocking up their streets. Yeah. And allowing the Confederates to come in and start to gather these guys up by the score as prisoners.
Sure. Yeah, I believe that. I mean, a lot of the First Corps units, like Robinson's division, say, they didn't come up through the town, correct? They took the path that Wadsworth's division took, across lots, right? Not coming straight up the roads through town.
They're coming through the Sheeds Woods south toward the Chambersburg Pike, and then moving along where the railroad bed is today, kind of toward the college. And then when they get into the western edge of town, which is about where West Street is today, trying to get through town the best way they can, left here, right here, over a fence, that kind of thing.
Yeah. So to go back the quickest and most direct way possible away from the danger that you see in front of you, they're probably not retracing their route. They're going by a completely new route. Correct?
Are we talking about?
Well, the Union troops in general.
In general?
The First Corps especially. Right? Because they're probably trying to go through the town. They're not going the way they came up. And that's got to be confusing.
Yeah, because they came up the Emmitsburg Road and turned at the Kadori Farm, went across the open fields up to where the Schultz house is today at the corner of Seminary Avenue and Middle Street or Fairfield Road. Yeah. So you're right. Now they're going, directly into the town from the seminary. And you're right. They have not seen these streets. You're right.
I mean, maybe even if you have seen the streets, still you've only seen them once, and now you're panicked. So maybe it wouldn't have helped anything. But still, they don't know where to go necessarily. And
it's just so much confusion in the streets of town.
Yeah.
Because the 11th Corps is coming in on your left, and you're not even sure where you're supposed to go, Cemetery Hill south of town. And like I said, some of these guys were actually climbing over fences and backyards and stuff.
Yeah. I mean, it must be like what it's like when Bike Week is going on.
Good analogy. Chaos and confusion.
And a lot of noise.
A lot of noise. Yeah, if you haven't experienced that sometime, come and check it out.
Yeah, for just a day. All right, so now I skipped around there a little bit, but so let's get back to Seminary Ridge. So the fighting on Seminary Ridge around the seminary itself. What does the 151st go through there? Are they beaten up more? Or are they given back? Or what's going on with them? And when do they retreat?
I think they're making units like the 14th South Carolina pay. There were like 34 Union cannons ranged along Seminary Ridge. You can see a couple of them where Mary Thompson's house is. If you're going up 30 toward the town, you look over and you see those two cannons over there. Yep. So there's like 34 of them on the ridge, and they're making the Confederates pay a terrible price in capturing Seminary Ridge and forcing the Union Army off of it. But the 151st is kind of in the middle of the seminary. Like I said, they're kind of right where the Schmucker Hall is, and they're once they start to get flanked on their left, they're falling back and using the building itself as shelter. But eventually, the whole line gets overlapped to the south, and everything falls back.
Where do they fall back to?
Excuse me. Well, I know a lot of them talked about coming down like High Street, what is today High Street, and then getting to like Washington Street, and then turning right. They said there was a lot of congestion at the corner of like High and Washington Street.
Was it road construction?
Kind of like it is today, yeah.
They must have been working on the roads then too. But yeah, so go ahead. They make a right on Washington.
And then make their way back to Cemetery Hill. Of course, once you get back to Cemetery Hill, you pretty much reach safety. There's about a 4,000-man reserve left there by Howard earlier that day, and about 43 cannons posted up there. So once you get south of where the Farnsworth House is today, you pretty much reach safety.
Where did they end up being assigned to after they?
The First Corps was put. They were chewed up so badly. The entire First Corps lost like 50% of the men. They ceased to exist.
Yeah.
Like the Third Corps after the battle.
Right.
They were put kind of in the rear of Cemetery Hill. My guess is probably in the area where the Comfort Inn is today, kind of on the reverse slope down the Baltimore Pike, in that low area, kind of where the cemetery is today.
Some more as a reserve?
Yeah.
Okay.
Because they were so chewed up.
Yeah.
And the 11th Corps is up on top of Cemetery Hill, and the 2nd Corps is supporting them on the left, and then 12th Corps comes in and occupies Culp's Hill on the right.
Right. So then the rest of the battle, do they see any action at all? Are they
do.
Called up? Okay.
On the third day, they help repel Pickett's charge.
Okay, amazing. There you go.
I don't know that they took any kind of serious casualties in that like they did on the first day. But where they were, along with the 80th New York Biddle's Brigade, is kind of between the copse of trees and the Pennsylvania Memorial, if you know what it is. Probably just north of where the 13th Vermont with Stephen Brown regimental marker is. Maybe opposite the Gibbon wounding tree, the black walnut, the witness tree, kind of to the right of that.
Okay, yeah.
When you go up the road, and the black walnut is the one that was damaged last year.
Yeah.
Is on your left, and then just kind of to the right of that, maybe just a little bit further up.
Okay. I
don't think they have a monument there, but I think the 80th New York may have one there. One of their sister.
Yeah, that sounds familiar. The 80th New York being in that area.
Yeah.
Okay, but so after the battle, so what are their total casualties by the end of the battle?
The number I'm familiar with is 337 out of 467.
Okay.
So that comes out to, I wrote it down here somewhere, 72%. Casualties, yeah. How's that?
God.
That was the 9th highest percentage casualties in the entire Army of the Potomac in the battle. They were number 1 in wounded. out of 300 regiments. Second in total casualties, only second to the 24th Michigan, and sixth in total killed. So, if you go to the Pennsylvania Memorial and you go around the corner to the left side, their regimental plate is the first one around the corner to the left, facing north.
Yeah.
And you look at it, and there are stars there for all the guys that were killed. And you look at all the other regiments, it's like looking at a starry night. I mean, it's just all kinds of stars. But here's the thing. They were first in wounded. And if they survived their wounds, there's no star.
Okay.
So what if they put the wounded on there? They were number one in wounded. What would it look like now?
Right.
So.
Well, yeah. So, I mean, that's a huge number to lose out of, especially because, like, your contract's almost up. You made it through. You were there at Fredericksburg. You were there at Chancellorsville, but you didn't get into a lot of heavy fighting. You're lucky. And then here's Gettysburg.
Yeah.
Here comes Gettysburg, and you get torn to bits. Not fun. What happens to them after the Battle of Gettysburg?
They pretty much
are done.
Mustered out. Yeah. The next battle, of course, the next major battles are in Northern Virginia in the fall, and then the really big battles come the following spring when Grant comes east, and we go into the Overland Campaign in the spring of '64. So they were a 9-month regiment, and they were pretty much at the end of their term of enlistment, and they had so many casualties as it was now. There weren't that many guys left.
Yeah.
And they just, as far as I know, remained in the First Corps in the pursuit of the Confederates, and by the time they got back into Virginia, it was time for their enlistment to run out.
So do you know when their enlistment ended exactly? What date?
Well, supposedly the date that the government set, because the guys in the unit were saying we should have been out by late June, was the 27th of July.
Okay.
So that's pretty much the end of the Gettysburg campaign.
Right. And do we know, did they enlist in other units, or did the survivors, or did
I think they've been 9 months.
Yeah.
So most of them are just gone.
They're like, we're done.
Kind of did their part.
Yeah, I'll say. All right. Is there anything else that you want to add that the audience should know before we go to our break?
Yeah, I appreciate that, Matt. I just want to talk a little bit about where they were from.
Go for it.
They were from the biggest county that they came from was Berks County, Reading, Pennsylvania. South Central Pennsylvania. Over 4 companies, 4 and part of another company, were all from Berks County. So almost half the regiment was from Berks County. But they were also from Susquehanna County, which is northeastern Pennsylvania, Pike County, which is northeastern Pennsylvania, Warren County, which is west. And then they had some from Juniata, Snyder, and Perry County, which are just counties north of Harrisburg.
Schuylkill.
And Schuylkill County, that's the other one. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I used to live in Pike County. Pike County is nice.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. For a year.
It's on the eastern. Does it border?
It's
the
where
Delaware
like New
River?
York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania all meet.
Like Port Jervis, that area.
Yeah. I lived in just outside of a town called Milford.
I know where Milford is.
Yeah,
that's where your friends are from. Near Matamoros.
Yep.
84, right where it goes over the Delaware Watergate.
That's
right?
exactly right. Yeah,
I've been there.
I was in a town called Dingman's Ferry.
Oh, I know Dingman's.
Do you really?
Yeah.
Okay. It's really nice up there. I couldn't stay there year round though, because winters are really depressing in the mountains. It gets so much darker earlier, and the wind whistling through those bald trees. Yuck. Nobody likes that. Well, I don't like that. But anyway, it's a nice area nonetheless. So they're from all over the place. And go ahead. I'm sorry. I interrupted you there. You had more? No.
Are we done?
No.
Or are we just taking a break?
Yeah, we were going to take a break, but
okay.
I wanted to give you whatever else you wanted to cover there.
That's
where they're
pretty
from.
much it.
Okay.
I've got some quotations of McFarland and some other people that have observed what they did that I think are kind of neat. And Mike Drees mentioned some things.
Well, go ahead. Give it to us.
Oh, you want to do it now?
Yeah, do it now.
Okay. Well, this I thought was really interesting. St. Clair Mulholland, who was the commanding officer of the 116th Pennsylvania, he apparently wrote like a booklet about the Battle of Gettysburg. And he wrote a description of McFarland just before they went into the fight, the 151st. So they're taking cannon fire and there's bullets whizzing around. And he says about McFarland, he said he was exceedingly calm, and that in the midst of the growing storm, and while awaiting the infantry attack, he quietly sat on the ground taking notes. while the shells were flying in all directions. I'm trying to picture that. I'm thinking, now that is a picture of a calm officer, right?
Yeah,
taking notes.
Taking notes.
When the bullets are flying around, not before the battle. Well, before it really got involved, but still, they're in the midst of the fight. So I thought
I'd love to see what those notes are.
A school teacher.
Oh
Yeah.
He's a teacher. He's just taking notes.
He's just taking notes.
Well, that makes sense, doesn't it?
Stratocumulus clouds.
Kind of like Tom Hanks in Saving Private Ryan, the school teacher.
Yeah.
But Mike Drees, the author of the 151st Pennsylvania at Gettysburg, said that he thought that kind of inspirational courage really steeled the men. As they're watching McFarland sitting there in the tree and taking notes, that it steeled them for the ordeal which they were about to encounter.
Yeah, I would think that would work on me if I saw my leader just calmly writing notes or, doodling in a sketchbook or something.
Yeah, so
I'd either think he's insane or really calm.
Well, you mentioned earlier, you said what made these guys stand there and take this, and I guess one of the things was superior leadership. Clearly McFarland was a great leader.
Yep.
The men believed in him, and so it's a difficult moment.
And he was right there with them.
Right. And not a lot of guys
send the lieutenant colonel in. He's right there with them.
Yep.
And he's encouraging them the whole time. And he was on his horse too, wasn't he? He was mounted for a while until it got shot out from under him. Look at that. Even Mike didn't remember at first.
Yep.
Yeah.
Mike knows that happened, so that's good.
Yeah.
Because I didn't know.
That's kind of what leads to him getting hit.
Right. He gets shot, his horse shot out from under him, and then he gets his own ankles shot.
Yeah.
So now he's wounded in both ankles or both legs or.
Yeah, my understanding is the bullet went through both ankles, and I remember talking to Mike about this, and he said that he never fully recovered the rest of his life from the wounds. Like he was on crutches the whole time. As a matter of fact, there's a picture of him in front of the monument the day they dedicated it, and McFarland is standing on the north side of the monument. He's holding a crutch. And Mike even says in the picture, McFarland can be identified by the guy holding the crutch right at the monument. But one of the things I remember that Mike said, and this was years ago, he said throughout his life, these shattered pieces of bone from his ankles would emerge.
Come out, yeah.
And that he dealt with that the rest of his life. He was essentially crippled for the rest of his life because of those wounds.
How long did he live?
I don't know. Do you know, Mike?
1891.
1891 is when he died.
He had his right leg amputated just below the knee.
Right leg amputated just below the knee.
Yep.
Keep going.
And then he had his left ankle shattered.
Ooh.
And he lived with that for the rest of his life. But here's the guy who didn't just sit in bed and wallow about it.
Right, like I would.
This guy has an amazing life.
What does he do?
He actually starts a soldier's orphanage or soldier's orphan school.
Okay.
And so he runs that. He also runs a tree farm, a Christmas tree farm at one point.
Oh.
And his son
It's a very Pennsylvania thing to do.
Becomes influential in the conservation movement, and some have credited his son as being the father of the National Park Service.
That's Horace McFarland, right?
Yes, Horace McFarland.
Wasn't he involved in some kind of publishing or something like that in Harrisburg?
Oh, yeah, and he had a circulation initially of that newspaper of 300, and through his exertions, even being crippled, he got it up to 5,000.
Wow.
So, yeah.
So, I don't know, a few years ago, there was a story about a guy who had an a tire dealership in Harrisburg, and the hillside fell on his property, and he can't get it fixed because they can't figure out who, what I'm talking about, Eric. And the building that was up above that was starting to deteriorate or may have caused the collapse is called the McFarland Building.
Yeah.
And I have a feeling that might be...
There was a printer in there before, and it is called the McFarland Building.
Mm-hmm.
What the hell?
Where did you say that was?
Street is that?
Harrisburg.
It's in Harrisburg. Yeah, it's right along Cameron.
Cameron Street.
Right along
Okay.
Cameron Street.
That is a major street through Harrisburg.
Huh. So he... I lost my... Oh, yeah. So, no, you were saying... So he did all that, and then his son is the father, or thought of as the father of the National...
influential ones that
right.
the National Park Service, yes.
Horace was
Horace,
his name.
I think that's the name, is it?
Horace McFarland. J. Horace McFarland.
J. Horace. Yeah, that sounds right.
With all due respect to the Horaces in the audience, what a name. I would not want to have that name. What would they call you for short?
Ho.
Ho?
Howie, I don't know.
Okay, it's better than what I was thinking. But this is a family
Sorry
show.
about that.
It's okay. It just made me laugh the way you just came right out with it. You didn't even think for a second. You just went,
Hey, Joe, home.
Okay, so let's take a break now. We'll come back with the questions from our patrons and hopefully some more jocularity. I think that was the word I was looking for. We'll be right back.
You've heard us promote various ways that you can help us keep the show going, but one way we haven't pushed too much is our sutlery at addressinggettysburg.com/shop. That's a shame because we have designs over there by talented artists like Ty DeWitt of 1863 Designs and Mike Stretch of the Heritage Depot. So now we're promoting it. Buying shirts, hoodies, mugs, and other items from our sutlery not only helps us keep the lights on, but it also helps guys like Ty and Mike, and it helps spread the word about the show every time you wear an item or you sip from your mug. So head over to addressinggettysburg.com/shop and grab some merch. It's the perfect Christmas gift for the Gettys nerd in your family. That's addressinggettysburg.com/shop.
Seminary Ridge Museum and Education Center, Gettysburg's premier museum, is housed in the historic Lutheran Seminary building constructed in 1832, a witness to the first day of battle. The museum's 3 floors of exhibits connect visitors to the dilemmas that led to the Civil War, provide a powerful and personal view of the battle's first day, and explore one of the battlefield's largest hospitals. No visit to Seminary Ridge Museum and Education Center is complete without a guided tour of the building's famous cupola, where on the eve of battle, officers and civilians saw thousands of Confederate soldiers' campfires burning to the west, and Brigadier General John Buford watched for vital federal reinforcements as fighting erupted on the morning of July 1st. Today, you can stand where Buford stood and discover how this view helped chart the course of the Battle of Gettysburg. Your trip to Gettysburg is not complete without a serious visit to Seminary Ridge Museum and Education Center, Gettysburg's premier museum. Purchase tickets online at seminaryridgemuseum.org or call 717-339-1300. To get tickets or a cupola tour, listeners may call or walk in and mention Addressing Gettysburg, or by ordering online using the promo code AG1863 for 20% off. Seminary Ridge Museum and Education Center. It began here.
There's a devil to pay.
For the Historian has a wide variety of titles, new and used, of military books from publishers like Osprey, Gettysburg Publishing, Stackpole, Savas Beatty, UNC Press, and more. I make it a point to go there once a week because I have new bookshelves to fill and I never know what treasures I'll find, and neither will you. They even have toy soldiers, model kits, games, children's books, and more. So stop by and check them out on your next visit to Gettysburg, or better yet, order right now online at forthehistorian.com and mention that you heard about them on Addressing Gettysburg in the Note to Seller box, and they will refund you your shipping. And if you call 717-685-5207 or stop by the store on your next visit and mention us, you'll get 20% off retail price. That's forthehistorian.com or 717-685-5207. Bo Brinkman is no stranger to Gettysburg, filmmaking, or this audience. An established Texas filmmaker, Bo has held the lead and supporting roles in television and film, including the 1993 film Gettysburg and its prequel Gods and Generals. Bo has written, produced, and directed several films, often drawing his characters and storylines from his ensemble of intricate comical and emotional family tales. The Last Mark, The Bay House, and Last Man Club are among his collection, with the latter winning Best of Show, Best of Picture, Best of Film, Best Narrative Feature, and Best Dramatic Feature. Now, 30 years after the release of Gettysburg, Bo returns to the same town for his next film, A Gettysburg Christmas, and he is looking forward to your assistance in bringing the film to life. Just go to GoFundMe.com and search for A Gettysburg Christmas, or click the link in the show notes and choose your level of support. Hey, Gettysburg business owners, winter is just around the bend, and you know what that means: no tourists. But just because people aren't coming to you doesn't mean you can't bring your business to them. If you ship, you're still in the game. And if you're a seasonal business, the time to advertise for your next season is in the off-season when people are making their plans. So what's an affordable yet highly effective way of reaching those people? Well, it's not radio, it's not TV, and it's certainly not print. Step out of the Jurassic era of advertising and run an ad on Addressing Gettysburg. We just reached 1 million downloads, and we're growing by the tens of thousands every month. Beyond that, our audience is happy to support those who support their favorite podcast. So email sales@addressinggettysburg for more information about advertising on our show. We look forward to helping your business grow. That's sales@addressinggettysburg.com.
You're listening
to the Addressing Gettysburg podcast with Matt Callery.
And we're back. Big controversy during the break brought up by Eric, the producer, which I'd like to get into now because, again, the Schoolteacher Regiment. I know that there are a lot of people that like this regiment simply because it's called the Schoolteacher Regiment. But, Eric, while we were talking about it, you were doing some research. And what did you find, Eric? Eric Money, ladies and gentlemen, producer of Addressing Gettysburg.
It's bullshit.
Beep. Why do you say that?
So, like, all this kind of stuff is relatively easily verifiable, especially with Pennsylvania. The Pennsylvania State Archives are the ones that have the muster rolls and descriptive lists that exist for Pennsylvania regiments. And handily, they have digitized most of them. It's not a terribly easy system to get through. Some of it is, to be perfectly honest, a right pain in the ass. Like some of them are legitimately just digitally scanned microfiche films, like from back in the day when you had to go to the library and sit behind this weird computer looking thing, but it wasn't.
But it wasn't a computer.
It was like this, like an overhead projector, but kind of in reverse. And, like you turn the knob and it just like physically scrolls through. So it's like that. But I pulled the descriptive list, the descriptive list basically from May 63. For the 151st PA, and I went through each company because they have the occupations listed for every person in the company, and I counted 19.
19 teachers.
Now, my count might be off by one or two.
Because you went to Catholic school, too.
Well, no, because some of them are illegible.
Aha! So
however,
there could be more, but no more than...
There could be, but not 113.
Right, so maybe no more than 25? How many would you say were illegible?
I would say at most 25 total, including the ones that I couldn't really read, but don't really look like they say teacher.
Right, okay. And you were looking in Mike Drees's book, and when we were talking about this, and what did you find?
Well, Mike quotes McFarland, the colonel, the teacher. George took great pains to ascertain how many teachers were serving in the 151st. Following a detailed survey, he concluded that the regiment included 60 former educators. But I think what's really kind of pertinent, kind of dovetails, segues in with what Eric's saying, is what Mike wrote at the end of his appendix dealing with this. And the last thing he wrote was, the important point to remember is that bravery and self-sacrifice are not confined to any one occupation.
Correct.
At Gettysburg, each member of the 151st Pennsylvania, whether he was a farmer, a blacksmith, a shoemaker, a merchant, lawyer, politician, or teacher, faced death or serious injury with courage and dignity for the cause he believed in.
That's right.
That's Mike Drees.
Yeah, they're all brave and ballsy for just being able to stand there without pissing their pants and running away like I would do. And by the way, one of the I noticed occupations that you listed there, Eric, was artist. I don't know too many tough artists.
Yeah,
there was one right there.
Yeah, there's one artist listed in Company D.
Yeah, you wouldn't see artists like that today. Well, maybe you would. Who knows?
And what's interesting is, like, if you look at the breakdown, like the density per company, the company like that would have included McAllisterville, Company D from Juniata County, isn't even the highest density of teachers in a company.
Right. And McAllisterville, I don't know if we said this on the show.
Yeah.
Why is that significant?
The McAllisterville Academy, where George McFarland was turning out teachers.
Right. So right. So it's, in other words, how many would you say were in that company? Do you remember off the top of your head?
There are 6.
6.
Yeah.
6.
And they are tied with Company E for 6.
Now I wonder, has anybody ever done this research to find out, is the number of teachers in that regiment more than you would find in any other regiment? Maybe in another regiment, the average of all the other regiments together would maybe be 3, and so maybe comparatively, that's a lot.
I mean, potentially, but
we don't know. Nobody knows this.
20 out of almost 1,000. That's
yeah, exactly. It's not
not
I mean,
a
they
whole
really,
lot.
when you were listing all the occupations, they should call it the
2%.
Farmers Regiment
That's
or something.
2%
Right.
of the regiment.
Yeah. All right. Well, there we go,
there's a
folks. So in other words, like with everything else that we talk about here, the more you start to parse it, there's always that one question somebody asks that makes everybody go, and then you look into it, and then you go, wait a second. And a good point that either, I can't remember if it was Mike or Eric or both of you brought up while we were talking during the break is that, McFarland in his speech at the dedication of the monument says 113. And I go, well, where the hell did he get that number? Yeah. And Eric, I think it was Eric, he so properly snapped back. Yeah. They all made shit up or something to that effect. And he's like, look at Chamberlain. Look at what Chamberlain says and everything like that. So I think the thing that's so interesting about studying all this stuff is we want to have cut and dry, definitive answers on every question we have. And the more you learn about it, I find the less I know, the less anybody knows, the less there is to know. We have to kind of, it's almost like the Bible, right? Like you take the Bible, there's good lessons in the Bible, but can we verify that it's actually 100% historically accurate in every word? No, we can't. But the lessons are good. And I think that's really the way I approach this and the way I walk away from it is, whether it's 113 or 13, it doesn't matter. They got the name the Schoolteacher Regiment. Somehow this all came about. And to me, that's the interesting story. How did it come to be that we think of this as the Schoolteacher Regiment and Eric could only count 20 of them on the muster rolls? So, like, that's what's so interesting. And that's what keeps that little tingle going in my brain. Every time I think I'm getting bored with this, something like this comes up and I go, oh, there's a new thing to get into. So I like that stuff.
I have no evidence or data to back this up, but I suspect it has everything to do with George McFarland being in command of the regiment. He was the school teacher, right, and therefore it was the school teachers apostrophe.
Okay. So that was what I asked during the break. Are we sure that he's not saying, or they're not, whoever the hell coined that term, school teacher apostrophe S or S apostrophe, right, because that makes a difference. Yep. And if somebody, like, let's say, for example, I'm just making this up, McFarland was going around and he goes, look at my beautiful boys, the Schoolteachers Regiment. But we don't know where he put the apostrophe, so who knows? That makes it more interesting. But anyway, Eric, thank you for looking that up while we were talking before, because I think that made an interesting conversation during the break.
I'm big on dissent.
No, and that's what's good about it. It's you got to have that. I might, because of course we recorded it during the break, so I might put that at the end of the show after the theme song is over. I'll have to go through and do some bleeping though. Eric gets very worked up over these things, and sometimes the curses flow like wine. So I might have to go through for the sake of the young ears in the audience and bleep it. But I think it might be worth it because it's an interesting conversation. All right, so don't forget, these questions are submitted by some of our awesome patrons over at patreon.com/addressing Gettysburg. If you'd like to submit questions for our guides to answer and get exclusive content that takes a closer look at all things Gettysburg and Gettysburg related, please consider joining us on Patreon today. Our first question is Ethan Gallo. And he says, were they, the 151st, involved in any bayonet work during the battle?
No, not that I'm aware of.
Didn't get to that. Tim Dolan says, was McFarland mounted during his regiment's stand near Herbst Woods? I know his horse was shot out from under him near the seminary after falling back, but I always wondered if he was mounted prior to that. So from what I read today, he was.
Yeah, and you recall what St. Clair Mulholland said. He saw him sitting by a tree taking notes.
Yeah.
So I don't know where the horse is there.
Maybe it was dead by that point. Was that before or after they went in?
It was just before they went in.
No, so the horse was probably just tied to the tree.
It could be.
Yeah, sitting by. I don't know. But yeah, no, I think I read before that he was mounted. And that actually, the reason why I'm certain of that is because, yeah.
We're talking about on the 1st.
Yeah.
When would St. Clair Mulholland have ever seen
I'm so glad you asked that, because when you mentioned that before, I'm like, wait, why would he have witnessed this?
Yeah, he wasn't. Yeah, I wondered about that too. But he wrote a book about it, so I don't know where Mulholland got that.
Well, he might have talked to people.
Yeah.
He could have done that.
I'm sure he did.
I mean, is the book like completely his eyewitness account, or
no? Apparently not.
Apparently,
like you said, he's with the 116th, and they weren't around on the first.
No, yeah, exactly. That's a good point, Eric. I should have said that before. Why? This is another one from Tim. Why, if the 151st was ordered by the chain of command to move forward to Herbst Woods, did they ever receive an order to retreat? Why did McFarland have to make the decision himself? Why didn't they ever receive an order to retreat, I think is what he meant to say.
That's because everybody's back at the seminary already.
Yeah.
These guys are out there by themselves.
Well, and I'm imagining, though, that, they're at the seminary. We think of, standing on Seminary Ridge right now and looking out, and we can see where the 151st was, but there was smoke on that day. There was a lot of smoke. Yep. And maybe they wouldn't have been able to see them so well to know what's going on. And they're licking their wounds, too.
Yep. And like, beyond that, everybody's got problems of their own.
Exactly.
Yeah. Like... those guys are like way out there, man. They're doing whatever in the woods. I have at it.
Yeah.
We have shit to deal with over here.
Right.
In line with that, in Mike's book, he says that the rest of Biddle's brigade, minus the 151st, lost 560 out of 900 officers and men.
Yeah.
The other three brigades, or the other three regiments, excuse me.
They're busy.
Yeah.
So, they're licking their wounds, as you said.
Yeah. And they're probably further fortifying whatever earthworks or breastworks that are there. You're right. They, like Eric says, they got their own shit to deal with. Yeah, that's a good way to say it. Stephen Lunsford, host of, what's the name of that podcast that you were on, Eric?
The Civil War Regiments.
The Civil War Regiments podcast. You're welcome, Stephen. Hey, guys, I'm sure you will most likely be discussing this, but what was the actual percentage of members of the regiment who were actually teachers? Okay, we did do that, as they were all volunteer soldiers, I'm assuming, from many different backgrounds. When we speak of the Schoolteachers Regiment, and he doesn't have an apostrophe in here at all, so that's a third way. That's a third way, just plural.
Plural non-possessive.
It gives a visual that a group of 500 dudes armed with bifocals wielding rulers and bad grades for rebels advanced on that fateful July day. Follow-up question. Given the catastrophic losses in the regiment just days before they were mustered out, with a large percentage of killed and mortally wounded, what was the impact on their homes, families, and communities? Good question there. Jim?
That's a real good question. I imagine it was like the impact on all families that had people in the Civil War.
Yeah. No, these families particularly enjoyed losing all those men.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, there's the main breadwinners. They're gone. So it, almost all the unit is casualties, almost 72%, something like that.
It had to be a huge blow to, of course, all those people back home. Stephen, I'm sorry we answered your question before I got to ask it, but it was something that was obviously on all of our minds here, and we got into it during the break there, so forgive me. Mitchell Randall, who has apparently a fondness for my eyebrows. He says Private Lyman Wilson carried Lieutenant Colonel McFarland back to the seminary for treatment of his wounds. He nearly gets shot in the process. Where's the process? Is that by the prostate? Does Private Wilson's story end here? Did he ever receive a medal for his efforts under fire?
I'll have to look it up.
All right, Lyman Wilson.
Mike says here.
Lyman Wilson. We're looking that up there. Mike, what do you think? Do you know anything about Lyman?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mike has them in here in the index. Go ahead.
Go ahead. I'll defer to Dries, who's the expert on this.
There you go. Mike's deferring to Dries, who's the expert on this. I had a teacher in high school whose middle name was Lyman, and we used to make fun of him. Because at that time, Lyman to me was just what Sprite uses. It's a mixture of lime and lemon. They call it Lyman.
Oh, my God. What is
I'm stalling for time while Jim's looking up the answer.
Yeah, I'm looking up the page.
I'm waiting for you guys to join me.
Right now.
Yes, exactly.
However, McFarland reported that the only man near him at the time, this is when he's heading back, was Private Lyman Wilson of Company F. Wilson scooped up his severely wounded commander and hastily made for the north end of the seminary. The 30-year-old private nearly paid the ultimate price for his brave act as a mini ball clipped off a button from McFarland's coat sleeve while the colonel's arm was draped around his neck. Miraculously, the pair safely reached the sanctuary of the large brick building. That's one reference. There's one other.
Can you imagine that? That's close. Man.
Let's see what they have to say about Lyman Wilson. After his severe wounding, George McFarland was carried into the northwestern corner of the building's first floor by Private Wilson, where he recalled, "I lay on the floor in my blood." Somehow George found the strength to scrawl a brief letter to his wife, blah, 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 and that's the end of the references to Wilson. So apparently, no. Maybe he should have got a medal, but I don't think he did.
Yeah. All right. Terry Bungie, I believe, or Bungie. I'm not sure how to pronounce that. New name by me. Welcome, Terry. Thanks for joining us here. He says, I would like to ask that since the 151st PA Regiment is nicknamed the Schoolteachers Regiment, what percentage of the regimental strength were actually school teachers? We already answered that one. And I've read both below and above average 50%. Also, that's a lot. Yeah. Also, is it true that Gettysburg was the regiment's first battle?
They were at Chancellorsville, but they really weren't engaged, just like most of the First Corps.
Right. And then 50% is way too high. We've already established that there.
You mean number of teachers?
Number of teachers, yeah.
We have.
That would be interesting, though. That would be interesting. Mike Kern says, my understanding is that prior to Gettysburg, 9-month regiments were viewed in a negative light by their 3-year counterparts. Did the actions of the 151st and those of other 9-month regiments during the battle do anything to change this view?
Yes.
Oh.
Mike Drees mentions that in the book.
Okay.
That, there was some suspicion about these guys that hadn't seen experience, but after Gettysburg, they had certainly earned the respect of the other units. In terms of support. I mean, 151st really did help the Iron Brigade get the heck out of Dodge,
Yeah.
And save. The problem was the units ceases to exist, so.
Yeah.
And most of those guys are not, I don't think, re-enlisting in other units.
But how about now? So, but they're not the only 9-month regiment in the Union Army at this point. So a couple of other ones that are, go ahead.
27th Connecticut.
27th Connecticut, Mikey.
Also, all the 2nd Vermont Brigade are 9-month men.
Okay.
The 153rd Pennsylvania and the 11th Corps is
nice.
9-month regiment.
Yep.
Yeah.
So other ones that did pretty well, handled themselves rather well.
There's not many by the time we get here.
Because most of them are mustered out.
Yeah, most of them have already left the Army late May, early June.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why you see such a huge dip between the numbers in the Army of the Potomac at Chancellorsville and the numbers in the Army of the Potomac at Gettysburg.
Mm-hmm.
And this could be an episode onto itself, the 9-month regiments and what they did here at Gettysburg, because
that is a good idea.
There's a lot of varied experiences there going on with those commands, and the same suspicions you see are, will they fight because they're being mustered out in maybe 2 or 3 weeks?
Right.
The same things that you see whispered about the 151st are being whispered about the standards men, about the 75 men in the 27th Connecticut. God knows why. They've had a bad enough service as it is. And then the 153rd PA. So, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, good. Thank you, Mikey. Jim, you want to add to that?
It's getting a little bit off the topic, but, if you look at the 11th Pennsylvania monument and what they did, they enlisted originally for like 3 months. They enlist April 61, and their enlistment runs out before the first major battle occurs in July. And it's a reflection of how everybody thought the war would be over very quickly. We'll kick their butts and it's all over. And then you look at that monument, the 11th Pennsylvania, you see they re-enlist. And when they re-enlist for 3 years. These guys are sobered now.
Yeah.
After first bull run, they realize this is not going to end in 90 days.
Right.
So we're in it for the long haul.
Yeah. Okay, that's a good point. Wild Bill Etzkorn, Captain Wild Bill Etzkorn, by the time this show airs, Corporal Jacob Shore, Company B, Pike County, survived Gettysburg and the war. He eventually went went on, I think is what he meant to say, to become famous for owning a stagecoach line and an ice house in Milford, Pennsylvania. Eventually, we were just talking about Milford. Eventually becoming mayor and finally passing away in 1921 from injuries of a farming accident. My question is, how typical was it for the common soldier to resume life as normal post-war?
I think it depends on whether you have all the equipment that you went into the war with.
Yeah.
I mean, like McFarland himself, for the rest of his life, he's essentially a cripple, trying to do the best he can. You look at some of the pictures of some of these guys in Mike's regimental history. A guy named Michael Link had a bullet go through one eye and the bridge of his nose come out the other side.
Oh.
He said that his one eye was just a running mess, and the other one was like hanging out the socket. Last thing he saw was a Confederate flag and somebody leveling a rifle at him. So he's blind the rest of his life, completely blind. So
yeah, and when was there anything like what we call disability back then?
I don't think so. I really don't.
Yeah. You just got your pension.
Yeah, I mean, things like PTSD. They didn't even know what it was. It wasn't until World War I that they come up with the term shell shock. But I'm certain
right.
These guys are certainly suffering from that.
They have to.
They're just, there just hadn't been enough experience with this kind of combat to deal with the repercussions.
I didn't realize here because it was at the bottom of my page, but I just scrolled up. He has more to the question. Solomon B. Brink, Company B, was killed on July 1st near the seminary. He is buried in Milford Cemetery. That's cool. I want to go there and see it now. How difficult was it to recover, remove, and reinter the dead at that time? I can make Gettysburg in 3 hours on interstates while speeding, so I can't imagine the logistics involved then. And finally, the 151st is a subject, so Bill, what the hell kind of writing is it? Finally, the 151st is a subject.
It is.
So I thank you for that.
It is a subject. That is true.
He's glad to say we talked about the 151st.
Well, he is, yeah, but I should have said this, and I meant to say this in the beginning, is that this episode is dedicated to Bill because he has been asking me for probably 2 years to do an episode on the 151st.
Oh, he's the one responsible.
He's the one responsible,
okay.
Yes.
This is his fault.
So anyway, the 151st is a subject, so I thank you for that. I also want to give my 100% endorsement of the bus tour with Jim. It was like listening to an episode of the show while driving the battlefield. So Jim, do you recall Bill and Cindy took a bus tour with you?
They got on my double-decker.
That's right.
That's right. At first I was like, what are you talking about? And then they're from your area.
Yeah.
Great people.
Yeah,
they're
people. Very fun people. And they've been very helpful to us here. And we're putting together that, I think I told you, on August 20th, we're doing a live show at the Farnsworth House.
Wow.
And
so cool.
Bill and Cindy are like the first and second in charge of our little committee to put that together. And it's great because I don't have as much of a headache as I usually do.
There you go.
So that's nice. So his questions then. Reinterring.
Can I talk about that?
Go ahead.
This one strikes close to home to me because Mike in his book about the 151st talks a lot about the sister regiments, and the unit was right to their left or to the south of them on McPherson Ridge was the 142nd Pennsylvania. And there was a lieutenant in Company E of that unit named Andrew Gregg Tucker. And he was a 19-year-old graduate of the University at Lewisburg, which became Bucknell University, alma mater. And he's buried in the same cemetery in Lewisburg that my family's buried in. He was wounded pretty badly on McPherson Ridge, and another guy was wounded, and Tucker gave his horse to another guy and remained in the fight even though he was ordered to the rear. And then eventually he made it back to seminary, but he was wounded pretty severely. And Mike talks about one of the guys in the 151st, I think it was, that was in the seminary hospital, and he saw the day that they buried Tucker. He said they took Tucker out of the seminary in a blanket, and they were burying him in the garden. And Mike said something about they saw Tucker's head fall out of the end of the blanket, and he said, I hope it's not unmanly to say that a tear stole down my cheek when I saw his hair dragging along the grave. But the point I'm getting at is Tucker's family heard that he'd been wounded here, 100 miles away from home. And there was, I believe, a professor from what is now Bucknell and some of the family, and they came down, probably down the river to Harrisburg, and then they probably tried to get a train or whatever they could over to Gettysburg. They had heard he was wounded. They didn't know he died. They were going to take him back home in the wagon and nurse him back to health. And when they got here, they found he was dead. So they had the wagon here, and they were able to recover his body. That's why he's not buried in the National Cemetery.
Okay.
But that's an exception.
Sure.
You know, most of these guys, he was an officer, a lieutenant, but so many of these guys, they couldn't afford to have a body embalmed or packed in ice or anything like that.
Yeah, that had to be a ghastly task to come here and retrieve the putrid body of a loved one. You know, I mean, it's got to be hard to do for a stranger, but this is somebody you knew in life intimately, and now you're collecting whatever is left of them. It's got to be the most heartbreaking thing. But then, we're so detached from death in the modern day. But death was all around them back then.
Yeah, it's not just the war, but the diseases.
And I mean, I'm sure that doesn't make it easier to lose a loved one, and it doesn't make it easier to here's his arm, put it in the blanket. When you go and get him 3 months after he died. But maybe it was a little old hat. It was familiar to them to have to go and do that. Or so, I don't know. It's tough. The whole thing is tough.
I can remember reading about my own great-great-uncle in the 155th Pennsylvania, Little Round Top, and one of their colleagues was killed in a battle up on Little Round Top, and he talked about in the regimental history about he and some other guys, taking the body somewhere, probably in the backside of Little Round Top, and burying it. They grabbed an artillery crate, piece of wood off of it, and scribble the guy's name and unit on it so that the family could recover the body. But a lot of times those guys didn't have time to do that kind of stuff. Like you guys said, they've got other things on their minds. Yeah. But you were really, really fortunate, if you got killed, but if you did get killed, that your buddy would actually mark your grave. The 3,600 Union dead in the National Cemetery, only 1,000 are completely identified.
Yeah.
Where they have their name and unit and stuff.
Right. Oh, yeah, because, that unknown section is huge.
Yeah, like almost 1,000 are completely unknown. We don't even know what state they're from.
Right.
Can't even bury them in state plot.
No, right. It's its own section. And then there's what, two on the one side, two on the east side of the monument, and then I think another unknown section on the westish side of the monument.
There's an arc. Around the Soldiers' National Monument. Right. That's what William Saunders wanted to do, to make sure that no state had priority and location in the cemetery to any other state. And so the states are arranged in a semicircle. At the beginning of the semicircle and at the end along the pathway are the completely unidentifieds. And they have the little square white markers with the numbers. And the numbers coordinate with files that the park has with information that they did get on the soldiers, hoping that maybe someday would identify them.
Can you go and see those?
That's a great question.
I would love to see those.
I would too. That's a great question.
Those files that correspond with the numbers on the graves of the unknowns.
Oh,
I'm sure you can.
I would think so.
But have you ever seen it? I guess you've never seen it.
No, I've never seen them.
I would love to see those.
What's in the files?
So the Park Service has files, so the unknown are numbered, right? They're not names, but they have files with whatever information they had, right?
Whatever they found on the body, little notes of things that they found, hoping they could identify.
I have that.
You have it?
Yeah.
Oh, how'd you get it? I heard it was top secret. Oh, it's the book. It's already in a book. What book?
It was originally the files are going to include like the notes, right?
Yeah.
But it was all published in the the committee report to the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania.
Okay.
Right. So the Soldiers National Cemetery Committee report. There's a revised one from 65 and I think another one in 66 or 67. But those include all those lists.
Can you bring that in one time? I'd like to look at that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Absolutely not?
No way.
Oh, now I got to beep again.
Bring it in. That's fine.
Yeah, bring it in tomorrow. That'd be cool. Oh, no. We don't have it. Oh, no, we do. All right. So that was it for the questions there. Did you Were you going? You look like you're about to say something else.
Nope, just have a couple things before.
Go ahead.
Okay. We talked about the casualties of 151st, and I think casualties are certainly a reflection of how a unit is engaged and how bravely they fight. The higher the number of the casualties, quite often, the more courage perhaps that they exhibit. That's not always the case, but I think generally it is a reflection that they're fighting bravely. But I think it's important to talk about maybe the casualties of some of the guys that they were fighting, what they inflicted.
Yeah, sure.
And, one of the major units that the 151st was facing, along with the 11th North Carolina, was the 26th North Carolina.
Mm-hmm.
And they lost, I think, from what I read, they came out of the fight. They had 800 men going in. Very large regiment, about twice the size of a typical regiment. They came out with 216. I think they lost like 550 on the first day, another 100 on the third day during Pickett's Charge, because, they get about as far as anybody does during Pickett's Charge. So, they were taking it. But let's face it, they were dishing it out too.
Yeah.
And the only other thing I have, Matt, is I just want to kind of to close. I've used this on tours. And my friend Mike Dries, who wrote this regimental history, did a great job. He gave me a T-shirt, and it's a picture of the 151st in front of their monument on July 1st, 1888, 25 years to the day after the battle. They're dedicating the monument. And there's a quote from McFarland, and I've used this even on tours, and he said, it's on the T-shirt that Mike gave me. It says, "Let us not forget to impress upon all, especially the young, the great principles for which we fought and suffered." George McFarland, July 1st, 1888.
Nice. That is a good way to end it, and I think that's what we're going to do. As Bill pointed out, Jim does give a great tour, so if you ever get on the double-decker bus there or any bus, do you do both buses or just the double-deckers?
Yeah, I do the enclosed.
So you
both
do
from the tour center and the visitor center and the double deckers. Most of those goes out of the tour center up on Baltimore.
Yeah.
The Cemetery Hill.
I see you coming through the lot here and you wave and everything like that. Mm-hmm. And I think those people are getting a good tour.
Thank you.
I just did one. I was hoping actually you were going to be the guide. I took my family on one on Saturday. But the Blade, Eric Lindblade was the guide. And so the whole time he was downstairs doing the tour and I was throwing things at him from up top just to throw him off. But he didn't notice at all. So he just kept on going.
Focused.
Yeah, it's very focused. It's like a laser. All right, so that's about it for us here, and thank you all for listening. Thanks for submitting your questions. Jim, thank you very much. Mike, thank you for your input. Eric, thank you for your awesome contradictory research there that helped clear the air on everything, and we'll talk to you all next time.
Need a Corps badge or other insignia for your uniform? Then check out the Badge Maker. Here's what some of his satisfied customers had to say. Miranda said, "I ordered an identification disc from Joe and it's fantastic. He hand-stamped it exactly as I wanted." Greg said, "My unit has purchased from him in the past quality badges and good service." And Jerry S. says, "The Badge Maker is the go-to place for accurate replica Civil War badges. So go to CivilWarCorpsBadges.com and attach a message with your order saying you heard about him on Addressing Gettysburg."
Our hearts so stout have got us fame, forsooth 'tis known from whence we came. Wherever we go, they dread the name of Garryowen in glory. Instead of spa, we'll drink down LBG.